One of these was a plan to detonate a nuclear bomb on the surface of the moon, just so the rest of the world would watch it flat. Another was a machine built to fly low over enemy cities, spreading deadly radiation as it passed. And every single one of them is real, written down, approved, and signed by the United States government. Tonight, we open 8 more files. Real programs, real documents, real money spent. They were denied, classified, or quietly buried for decades until a leak, a hearing, or a declassified memo dragged them into the light. So sit back, because the first file is a plan so strange you will think we made it up. We did not. File 1, Project in 1958, the United States was losing the space race. The Soviets had just launched Sputnik, and the Air Force wanted something loud enough to win back the world's respect. Their idea was simple and insane. They would fly a nuclear bomb to the moon and detonate it on the surface so that the explosion and the flash could be seen with the naked eye from Earth. The official name was a study of lunar research flights, and the file was marked Project 8. The Air Force hired a team of physicists at the Armor Research Foundation to work out how to do it. One of the young researchers brought onto the project to calculate the dust cloud was a graduate student named Carl Sagan, who would later become the most famous astronomer in the world. They studied the size of bomb to use the best spot near the line where light meets shadow on the moon so the flash would stand out, and the propaganda value of the whole thing. In the end, the plan was quietly shelved. The scientists themselves warned that detonating a nuclear weapon on the moon could ruin its surface for real research forever, and that the public might be horrified rather than impressed. The project stayed secret for almost 40 years until the physicist who led it, Leonard Reiffel, confirmed it was real in 2000. The government had seriously planned to nuke the moon as a show of strength, and that is only the first file. File 2, the Phoenix program. During the Vietnam War, I ran a program with a goal that sounds clinical on paper and chilling in practice, to identify and neutralize the hidden civilian network supporting the Viet Cong. The word neutralize did a lot of work. In reality, Phoenix meant capture, interrogation, and in thousands of cases, death. Run mainly from 1967 to 1972, the program built lists of suspected insurgents, then sent teams to detain them. Captured suspects were funneled into interrogation centers where torture was widespread. The numbers are staggering. By the program's own accounting, presented to Congress, Phoenix was credited with the deaths of more than 20,000 people, with tens of thousands more captured. The director of at the time, William Colby, testified about the program in front of Congress in 1971 and admitted that an exact count of how many were innocent was impossible. Critics called it a government-run assassination campaign. Defenders called it a brutal but necessary tool of war. Either way, the files are clear. The United States ran a systematic program to kill suspected enemies off the battle by the thousands and kept careful records while it did. The next file leaves the war zone and walks into a hospital. File 3, the Guatemala experiments. You may have heard of Tuskegee, where the government watched men die of syphilis without treating them. What the government did in Guatemala was, in one terrible way, even worse. From 1946 to 1948, doctors from the United States Public Health Service, the same agency behind Tuskegee, traveled to Guatemala and deliberately infected people with syphilis and other diseases on purpose to test whether penicillin could prevent infection. The victims were prisoners, soldiers, mental patients, and sex workers. More than 1,500 people exposed in total. The doctors infected them by paying infected sex workers to have contact with prisoners. And when that did not spread the disease fast enough, they applied the bacteria directly to scrapes and open wounds. None of them gave informed consent. Many were never properly treated. The lead doctor, John Cutler, would later also work on the Tuskegee study. The whole thing stayed hidden for over 60 years until a historian named Reverby found Cutler's own records in an archive in 2010. When it came out, the President of the United States personally called the President of Guatemala to apologize, and a federal commission was ordered to investigate. The government had crossed the one line. Even Tuskegee did not. It gave healthy people a disease. The next file is about what the government did with the dead. File 4, Project Sunshine. When the United States and the Soviet Union were testing nuclear bombs in the open air, those blasts threw radioactive material into the sky, and it came back down across the entire planet. One of the most dangerous pieces of fallout was a substance called strontium-90, which behaves like calcium, so the body stores it in bones. The government wanted to know exactly how much was ending up in human body, especially in the bones of children whose growing skeletons absorbed it fast. So in 1953, it launched a classified program called Project Sunshine To measure the strontium, they needed bone, lots of them. And so the project quietly collected human body parts from around the world, with a heavy focus on dead infants and young children, often without ever telling the grieving parents what was being taken or why. In one recorded meeting, a scientist on the project admitted the difficult, saying that human samples were of prime importance and that if anybody knew how to do a good job of body snatch, they would really be serving a useful purpose. Bodies and bones were shipped from hospitals and morgues across multiple countries to be tested for radiation. The families were never asked. The program ran for years in secret and only came to public light decades later through declassified documents and a government inquiry. The next file is a weapon so extreme that even the men who built it were afraid of. File 5, Project Pluto. In the late 1950s, American engineers set out to build what may be the most terrifying weapon ever seriously designed. The idea was a cruise missile powered by a nuclear reactor, one with almost no shielding that could fly for months at a time. It was called Project Pluto, and the weapon was named SLAM, the supersonic low-altitude missile. Here's why it was a nightmare. It would streak in low over enemy territory at 3 times the speed of sound, and its unshielded nuclear engine would spew a trail of radioactive exhaust across everything below it. The shockwave alone, from its low altitude passes, could shatter eardrums and flatten structures. And it carried not one, but a series of hydrogen bombs, dropping them on city after city as it flew after it ran out of bombs. The plan was for the missile to keep crisscrossing enemy territory, poisoning the ground with radiation until it finally crashed. In 1961, engineers at a test site in the Nevada desert actually built and ran the nuclear ramjet engine called Tory, bolted to the ground, and it worked. The program was real, funded, and tested. It was finally canceled in 1964, in part because it was considered too provocative and too dangerous even to test in flight. A missile designed to keep killing long after the war was over by poisoning the planet. The next file dives to the bottom of the ocean. File 6, Operation Ivy Bells. In the deep cold of the 1970s, American intelligence pulled off one of the most daring spy operations ever attempted. Somewhere on the floor of the Sea of Okhotsk, off the Soviet Pacific coast, ran an undersea cable that carried secret military communications between Soviet bases. The Americans wanted to listen, so the Navy, the NETS-A, and I sent a specially modified submarine, the Halibut, deep into Soviet water. Divers in a pressurized chamber left the submarine on the seafloor and found the cable. They wrapped a device around it that could record everything passing through without ever cutting it or leaving a mark. The wiretap did not even touch the wire. It read the signals through the cable's own insulation. Every few weeks, a submarine would return to swap out the giant recording pod, which was packed with tape. For nearly a decade, the United States listened to the private military traffic of the Soviet Union from inside their own water. The operation only ended because of betrayal. An employee named Ronald Pelton, deep in debt, sold the secret to the Soviets for a few $1,000s. The Soviets recovered the device, and today one of those recording pods sits in a museum in Moscow. The next file is about who the government was listening to back home. File 7, Shamrock in Minaret. For 30 years, the most secret agency in America was secretly reading the private messages of its own citizens. Starting in 1945, under a program called Shamrock, the National Security Agency, and the companies that carried America's telegrams,
the giants like Western Union, Ray, and it made a quiet deal every single day. The companies handed the government copies of the international telegrams flowing in and out of the country.
At its peak, the agency was processing around 150,000 messages every month. There was no warrant, there was no court, there was just a handshake that lasted 3 decades. The companion program, called Minaret, was even more pointed. The agency kept a watch list of American citizens and pulled their communications out of the stream specifically because of who they were. The list included civil rights leaders, anti-war activists, journalists, and even 2 United States senators. The government was spying on its own elected officials and the people criticizing it. The whole operation was exposed in 1975 by the Church Committee, the same Senate investigation that uncovered so many of these files, which called Shamrock, probably the largest government interception program affecting Americans ever undertaken. This was mass surveillance, decades before the internet. The last file tonight goes back to the sky and lights it on fire. File 8, the one they could not hide because millions of people saw it. On July 9th, 1962, the United States detonated a hydrogen bomb in space. The test was called Starfish Prime. part of a program named Operation Fishbowl. A rocket carried a warhead with the power of 1.4 million tons of TNT to an altitude of about 250 miles above the Pacific Ocean, far above where any plane flies, and set it off. The results stunned even the scientists. Hundreds of miles away in Hawaii, the night sky lit up in a glowing artificial aurora of red and green that witnesses watched from hotel rooftop. But the blast did something they did not fully expect. It released a massive electromagnetic pulse that surged through the island, knocking out streetlights, tripping alarms, and damaging telephone equipment in Honolulu, almost 900 miles away. Worse, the explosion created artificial belts of radiation around the Earth that lingered for years and crippled or destroyed several satellites passing through them. The United States had set off a nuclear weapon in space, blinded its own technology, and painted the sky over the Pacific in fire, mostly to see what would happen. It is the rare secret that could not stay secret, because the whole ocean watched it burn. 8 more files, a plan to nuke the moon for show, a program that killed thousands off the battle, doctors who gave healthy people a disease on purpose, a hunt for the bones of dead children, a missile built to poison the planet, a wiretap on the bottom of the sea, 30 years of reading a nation's mail, and a nuclear blast that set the sky on fire. Every one of them real. Everyone approved, funded, and signed, then buried until someone refused to keep it quiet. And here's the thought to leave you with tonight. These are only the programs that were eventually admitted. The ones forced into the daylight by a hearing or a leak or a single honest archivist, if a plan to bomb the moon and a hunt for children's bones are the secrets they were willing to confess.
Sit for a moment with what might still be sitting in the files they will never open.
Tell me in the comments which one disturbed you the most and which file you want me to open. Subscribe to the Unknown Files, and I will see you when the next one is declassified.